Jamin AI. Jamin AI.
Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at a blog post by Jamin Bradley. He's a pastor, theologian, musician, and author.
Wow.
Yeah, a very interesting guy. And the title of the post is Beautiful, but What Did It Mean? The Case for Comprehensible Art. And this is a really fascinating one because he describes reading a beautifully illustrated graphic novel. It was like 300 pages long.
Yeah.
And he finished it utterly baffled about what it meant.
Yeah, I could see that happening.
Yeah, so we're going to kind of explore this question of when creative expression crosses the line into incomprehensibility, and how does that impact the art's effect on us?
It's something that every artist, I think, struggles with, right?
Yeah.
Trying to push the boundaries and also connect with your audience.
Right, yeah. And what makes Bradley's experience so interesting is that he wanted to be challenged.
Mm-hmm.
He even says he sought out this graphic novel because it was described as thought-provoking.
And yet he still felt lost. It's so interesting that it wasn't a matter of him not appreciating the art, because he clearly values art that, breaks the rules. But in this case, it seems like the artist maybe went so far outside the box that the message was muddled.
So how do we define outside-the-box thinking in art? Is it purely subjective, or are there specific hallmarks?
That's a great question. I mean, I think outside the box can manifest in so many different ways, like unconventional uses of color, distorted perspectives, maybe you have abstract forms, or you play with chronology, or even use mixed media in unexpected ways. But I think the key is whether those elements serve a purpose beyond just being novel. Do they enhance the narrative? Do they evoke a certain emotion? Or are they just there to shock or confuse?
Well, and Bradley actually describes feeling like he was constantly missing plot points. Like the timeline wasn't clear, the characters were confusing, and the symbolic motifs went over his head.
Oh, wow.
And he even said that after he Googled the synopsis, he still felt like the central theme was lost.
It really speaks to this responsibility that the artist has to the audience, because you don't want to leave them completely in the dark. Even though, like I said, creative license is essential. It's like a comedian telling a joke that only they understand.
Yeah.
You might admire the effort, but you're not going to connect with the material.
So you're saying even if the art is technically brilliant, if it's incomprehensible to the audience, does it lose its power to impact?
I don't think it necessarily means that you have to dumb down the art, but there needs to be this bridge between the artist's vision and the audience's understanding.
Right.
It's a delicate balance for sure.
And that makes me think about the different ways art can impact us. Bradley actually defines great art as something that provokes thought, challenges assumptions, inspires repentance, and reveals new perspectives. And what's interesting is some art might achieve those goals even through a degree of confusion.
Yeah.
Think about surrealist paintings.
Yeah.
They can evoke powerful emotions and make us question our reality even if we don't fully understand their meaning.
You're so right. I never thought about it like that. That wrestling with something you don't understand can be powerful in and of itself. It can force us to confront our own limitations or assumptions about what we think art should be.
So when does that initial confusion cross the line from intrigue to frustration?
I think that's where the technical aspects of the art come into play.
Mm-hmm.
A skilled artist, even when they're experimenting with abstract or unconventional forms, is going to use techniques that kind of guide the viewer's experience.
Okay.
So for instance, in graphic novels, there are visual storytelling techniques, things like panel layouts, framing, character design, even just the use of color and shading. And they can subtly convey information and emotion, even if the narrative itself is complex or nonlinear.
So even when thinking outside the box, artists rely on some sort of established principles to help ground the audience's experience.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like when a composer uses dissonance. The dissonance can create tension and unease, but it's usually placed carefully within a framework of melody and harmony.
Okay.
So without that framework, the dissonance is just noise.
That's a really good analogy. So in Bradley's case with this graphic novel, it sounds like the artist maybe neglected that framework.
Yeah.
He mentions that he was left wondering what the point of all the intricate illustrations was if he couldn't even follow the basic story.
It's like the artist got so lost in their creative process, that they kind of forgot about the reader's experience.
Yeah.
That happens sometimes.
Yeah.
Artists can get so focused on their vision that they don't think about how it's being perceived.
Yeah, and that reminds me of the analogy Bradley uses. He compares incomprehensible art to a Bible scholar using overly complex language that most people can't understand.
It's a strange comparison.
Yeah, but...
It highlights this really important point, though. The goal of art and the goal of scholarship should be to illuminate, not to obfuscate.
Right.
So if the language is so dense or the imagery is so abstract that people can't connect with it, then the work kind of loses its impact.
That makes me think about how our own backgrounds and experiences shape our understanding of art. You know, what resonates with one person might leave another person completely cold.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, our cultural context, personal preferences, even our mood in the moment. All of those things can totally influence how we interpret a piece of art.
Yeah.
And it kind of begs the question, does a piece of art need to be universally understood to be considered good?
That's a hard one. I mean, some of the most celebrated works of art throughout history were controversial.
Right.
Or even rejected initially because they challenged the norms.
Exactly. Think about the Impressionists.
Yeah.
Their work was totally ridiculed at first.
For being too impressionistic.
For their brushstrokes.
Oh.
For the way they use paint.
Right.
And they seemed unfinished, but now they're masterpieces.
Right.
So it seems like the criteria for good art is always changing.
Yeah. So where does that leave someone like Bradley, who clearly appreciates challenging art, but also values comprehensibility?
Yeah, he's looking for that balance, right? And it's important to note that he doesn't advocate for artists to, like, water down their work.
Right.
But he does emphasize finding ways to bridge that gap between expression and understanding.
He seems to be suggesting that true artistic brilliance isn't just about complexity, it's also about making those ideas accessible to other people.
Exactly. It's about finding that sweet spot where your audience is challenged and intrigued, but not alienated.
Right.
You're inviting them into a conversation, not leaving them behind in a cloud of confusion.
And that's where the technical skill comes in, right?
Yeah.
You were talking earlier about how visual storytelling techniques in graphic novels, can help guide the reader.
It's like a magician.
Okay.
You know how when you're watching a magic trick, there's a trick involved? But a good magician makes it look effortless.
Right.
And I think it's the same with art. A really skilled artist can use technique and composition and color and light and shadow to create this sense of order and coherence.
Okay.
Even within a piece that's seemingly chaotic or abstract.
So going back to Bradley's experience with that graphic novel, it sounds like maybe the artist prioritized novelty over clarity.
Possibly.
Push the boundaries so far that even the technical elements weren't enough to ground the reader.
Yeah, that's the danger with thinking outside the box.
Yeah.
If you stray too far from what's familiar,
Right.
you risk losing people completely.
But then again, isn't the point of art to challenge our perceptions and make us uncomfortable?
It can be.
Yeah.
But then that puts the onus on the audience too, right?
Okay.
Like, are we willing to meet the artist halfway? Are we open to experiencing art that we don't immediately understand?
That's a good point. It's almost like there's a spectrum with engaging with art. On one end, you've got people who are passive. They just want to be entertained or they want something pretty to look at.
Yeah.
But then on the other end, you have the people who are actively participating. They're trying to figure out the meaning. They're grappling with the complexity.
And most of us probably fall somewhere in the middle, right?
Right.
Depending on the art.
Yeah. It makes me think about how sometimes we approach a piece of art with preconceived notions or expectations. And then when it doesn't fit into those neat little boxes, we get frustrated.
Or we dismiss it.
Right.
But that's why it's important to approach art with an open mind,
Yeah.
and a willingness to let go of our expectations.
To be surprised.
Yeah, to be challenged.
Yeah.
The most rewarding experiences often happen when we let ourselves be a little bit disoriented.
So how does Bradley's background as a pastor, a theologian, a musician, and an author?
Right. It's a lot.
Yeah, how does that inform his perspective on this whole tension?
Well, because he's a creator himself, he understands that impulse to push those boundaries, to experiment with different ways of expressing yourself.
Yeah.
But then as a pastor, he also values clarity,
Right.
making sure that he can connect with his congregation
Yeah.
on an emotional and a spiritual level.
And as musician, he's probably experienced firsthand the power of music to transcend language.
Totally. Music is so unique in that way.
Yeah.
It can evoke emotion and create a shared experience, even among people who are totally different. And it feels like that's what he's looking for in all art.
That connection.
That ability to connect, to resonate, to have a real impact.
It makes me think about how all of those experiences must have influenced his definition of great art.
How so?
Well, he emphasized art that provokes thought, challenges assumptions, inspires repentance, and reveals new perspectives. It's not just about aesthetics, it's about transformation.
He wants art that has the power to change us, to challenge our worldview.
And that brings us back to the central question.
Which is why?
When does creative expression cross the line into incomprehensibility? And maybe even more importantly, does that incomprehensibility diminish its value?
It's a tough question. Because on the one hand, art is subjective.
Right.
What moves one person might leave another person cold. And that's fine.
Like some people love abstract art
Mm-hmm.
and other people just think it's meaningless.
Exactly. But I think what Bradley is getting at is something deeper.
Okay.
He's asking if the artist has a responsibility to make their work at least somewhat accessible.
Like that analogy he uses of the Bible scholar using complex language that nobody understands.
You know, that scholar has an obligation to make that knowledge understandable to their congregation. So maybe artists have a similar duty to try to bridge that gap.
Between their vision and the audience.
Exactly. Because art is a form of communication.
Right.
And if the message is getting lost in translation, then something's missing.
You know, that makes me think about those times when I've seen a piece of art and it was baffling at first.
Yeah.
But then after studying it or thinking about it, suddenly it clicks, that aha moment.
Totally.
It's so rewarding.
It is. And sometimes that struggle to understand can actually make you appreciate the art even more.
How so?
Well, that's like when you solve a puzzle.
Okay.
The satisfaction comes from figuring it out.
Mm-hmm.
You put in the effort and then there's the reward.
So what about the art that never clicks? The stuff that just leaves you scratching your head.
Right.
Does that mean it's flawed?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think sometimes art can be valuable because it defies interpretation.
Okay.
It forces us to confront our assumptions, to be okay with ambiguity, you know?
Yeah.
To acknowledge that some things we might never fully understand.
It's like that saying, art is meant to disturb the comfortable and comfort the disturbed.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes that disturbance comes from encountering something that we just don't get.
Right.
It can be unsettling.
But enriching.
Exactly.
So maybe the value of art isn't just about communicating a clear message or evoking a specific emotion.
Yeah.
It's about provoking thought and challenging perspectives.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. And it's a perspective that makes sense coming from Bradley, given his background.
Right. He's not just a pastor or a theologian.
He's a musician. He's an author.
He gets it.
He understands the power of creativity.
And he seems to be encouraging us to approach art with that same open-mindedness, you know?
Yeah, to embrace the ambiguity.
Yeah, and to find value, even in the things that we don't totally understand.
It's a journey, not a destination.
Bradley leaves us with a final thought to ponder.
Oh, yeah.
Think about a piece of art that you just didn't get at first. Did you eventually come to understand it? And if so, what changed? If not, does that diminish its value?
That's a great question to think about. And I think ultimately it's up to each of us to decide. But don't be afraid to engage with art that challenges you, that makes you think.
That makes you uncomfortable.
Exactly. Because in those moments, you know, when we're uncertain and a little bit uncomfortable, that's when we often discover really profound truths about ourselves and about the world.
Well, I think we did it. We navigated this deep dive into comprehensible art.
It was quite the journey.
It really made me think about that tension between expression and understanding.
Yeah, it was a pleasure diving in with you.
And to our listeners, we hope you enjoyed this deep dive and that it inspired you to keep exploring the world of art.
Absolutely.
See you next time.
I turned the page, but the story was gone. Lost in a maze where the lines don't belong. The pictures were stunning, a feast for the eyes. But meaning slipped through like smoke in the skies. Oh, I crave the art that makes me feel, that shakes my soul, provokes and heals. Beautiful, but what did it mean? A symphony drowned in a cryptic dream. Art that's silent, though loud it screams. Is it profound or just unseen? They say break the rules, take the risk, be bold. But what good is art if the story's not told? To provoke, to invite, to open the door, not share between the complex and the art that cares. Don't let your brilliance build a wall. Art should rise but not let us fall. Lost in a hazy scene. Art that's silent just yet stays serene. That's the kind of art I've always dreamed. So here's to the artists, the poets, the bold. Make your stories clear, let their truth